please come up and grab an index card. We have pens. Bring back both the pen, the card with your question, and if it's something that's already not on the 20-some-odd questions we've received prior to this, we'll take a look at it, toss it to the moderator, which will have the ultimate say on whether he asks it or not. And that is, as I call him, the bureau chief of the Hockessin Community News. They're one of the largest small-town newspaper groups, actually the largest in all of the country. I think, what is it, 826 small-town newspapers all over the U.S. I always joke, Sean's our bureau chief out of Hockessin. He does a great job. He shows up at our data meetings, gets a lot of communications out. So Sean is our moderator for this evening, and you can film, you can record, you can have a good time. Our restrooms are right there in the middle of the hall. You don't have to ask, just go. And the exit's at the back. There's literature from the candidates back there. Be sure to grab some on your way out. And again, thank you for coming, and let's make this an enjoyable and informative debate. Thank you. We're going to introduce him and bring him.
Okay, thanks everybody for attending, and I've been drinking since noon, so if it don't make any sense, just let me know. I'm kidding, I've only been drinking since 3. We're going to introduce our candidates. As Mark mentioned, Mr. Arlett and Mr. Carper are not in attendance, but we do have Mr. Truono. Gene? And we also have Ms. Kerri Harris. Typically, folks, what we do is we allow 3 minutes for opening remarks, and then after that we have 2-minute limit the time for question response. So whenever you folks are ready, give me the thumbs up and we can proceed. Get some water, moisten the palate. There's a lot of talking. I always feel like the need to fill with banter, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to banter.
Good. Just give it a tap, make sure. The switch on the bottom, it's on solid green, it's on.
So how about those Eagles?
Great band.
They are great. I was just listening to Desperado one way over here. It's a live version. You seem appropriate.
Check.
Check. Awesome. Beautiful. Look at that.
They are picking up the check. You heard it here.
And that's catering by Drip Cafe. Great, so we'll just go back and forth, and we'll try to keep it so you will have an opportunity to start each question session. So, okay, we'll just start with Mr. Truono.
Yes.
Okay.
Kerri wants to
Sure. Oh, Kerri wants to go first? All right, there we go. So whenever you're ready, you can start the timer.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you to GATA for hosting this event. Thank you to Jean for coming out and participating. This is something we both looked forward to for a while. And thank you to the audience for participating in this as well and making sure you're active in our democracy. Again, my name is Kerri Evelyn Harris. I am a Democrat running for United States Senate, and I am so pleased and honored to be a resident of the state of Delaware. I originally am from Westchester, New York, but I had the honor and privilege of being stationed in Dover Air Force Base, and it has been my home since 2001. And Delaware is an amazing place to raise a family, and I will never call another place home. I am not a career politician, but I have spent my life serving our community, our country, and my neighbors day in and day out. I am a veteran, a parent, and a community advocate. As a veteran, I have seen how our nation sent us without due diligence into a war, and what that meant, what the true costs and tolls of war are on our troops. It's more than death, it's wounds that we carry with us for generations, and it affects our whole families. I know what it is to say we support the troops and really mean it, as opposed to most politicians who say it and then they leave our veterans and our active duty reserves and National Guard hanging in the wind. This is unacceptable. As a parent, I know what it's like to be fearful of tomorrow and wonder if my child will have a brighter future or will struggle more than I did. I know what it's like to wonder what healthcare looks like. Will I be able to pay my co-pays? Will I be able to pay my premiums? Will I pay the deductibles that are so exorbitant that even having healthcare seems like a joke? And as a community advocate, I know that all of our struggles are connected, each and every one. Regardless of the community I have visited, either as an organizer or as a candidate, we know from public housing to upper middle class homes, people are concerned about the same things. Our healthcare is inadequate. Our education systems don't have teachers who provide the proper resources to advance our children. We are not working and receiving the pay that we should. And we live in a nation that has a government that puts corporations over people. I have never seen a corporation that was the same as a human being. I am running because I know we deserve representation that understands the struggle that we live in now, understands this economy, understands that tomorrow we want a brighter day, and we want to go back to the Delaware where neighbors understand each other and feel connected, and we have civility once again in our politics. I thank you again for coming out. I thank you for participating in our democracy, and I dare you to act and be ready for change here in the state of Delaware.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I'd like to thank GATA for organizing this debate and for the thoughtful questions that I think they put together for this evening. So I'm Gene Truono, and I am the Republican running for the U.S. Senate. And first off, I want to say it's unfortunate that my opponent couldn't be here tonight because of a scheduling conflict, but for those of you who really want to see or contrast the two of us between the positions that we stand for on the Republican Party and the conservative principles that I believe in, you can go to our website at votetruono.com, click on our Facebook page or our YouTube page, and most of the debates we've had prior to tonight will be are posted there so you can see and judge for yourself. And there will be more debates coming in the future, so I encourage you to get out and compare and contrast the two of us as well, because the primary is September 6th, and I think it's important that we all exercise our right to vote. So my background is a little different. I'm a native Delawarean, and I spent 30 years in the financial services industry. One of the banks I worked for, I was actually their community development officer. So like Kerri, I worked in the community, but I saw firsthand how big government programs really don't help solve problems, that really the local communities, through nonprofits and faith-based organizations, can deliver those services much better than the federal government. So I think it's important that we take those experiences, life's experiences. Some of the other things that I've done in my financial services arena was actually work for a regulatory reform committee in the Treasury Department. I've also worked with our federal regulator, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency in Banking Regulation and Regulatory Reform. I've also negotiated with the Singaporean and the Australian and the Canadian governments to talk about how we bring financial technology and jobs to this country. Those countries are way ahead of us on these issues, and we can't fall behind. The Treasury Department recently announced that they're going to look at moving this agenda, and I certainly think that as a U.S. Senator, I could help drive that agenda to bring good-paying jobs back to Delaware. I'm not a career politician, nor do I aspire to be. I think we have seen enough of that in Washington. I do come from the private sector to bring my experience to Washington like our forefathers intended. Our slogan is principles, not promises. And what that means is that my two core principles are the Constitution and states' rights. And I believe we should use and look at every policy decision with that lens. We should uphold the Constitution when we craft policy or laws in this country, and we should look for ways that we can improve the health and well-being of all of our citizens. There's a lot of interesting and engaging questions, I think, that are going to be asked tonight, which will give us some real clear distinctions between our policy positions on most things. But one of the things that I think you need to think about, this is a very important election, because in Delaware, I believe we do not have representation with the conservative principles that I believe in, and I think we need to have that good dialogue between the left and the Democrats that represent the state, and the other opposing point of view, so we can develop good policy to help all the people of the state of Delaware. Thank you.
All right, so let's start in with foreign policy. We'll start with you, Ms. Harris. In your view, what is the most dangerous or serious issue that the U.S. faces in the near and long term, and what are your thoughts or ideas to address them?
As a veteran, I see firsthand how our foreign policy has failed us. We've gone into countries and armed authoritarian regimes thinking that they would be on our side. But time and time again, we have seen those same regimes turn on us. And it results in deaths to not just American lives, but civilian lives in those countries. When that destruction comes, we don't only leave behind broken countrysides. We don't just leave behind broken families. We leave behind a pathway for violence and terroristic ideologies to take over. We need to make sure that as we draft our foreign policy, that we are working to create a diplomacy-first type of foreign policy, that we exhaust every effort to communicate rather than destroy lives. This can happen, and we've seen it in the past. Unfortunately, we are seeing that our foreign policy is becoming even worse. We are seeing that our current administration is destroying alliances with friendly countries that we've known and trusted for years. We cannot risk that. Not only do we need to rebuild those alliances, but we need to expand upon alliances to countries that before we did not understand how they worked. But instead of trying to force our ideology on them, we need to be open and ready to progress forward as facilitators of democracies that work. Especially in the Middle East, we know that they are ready for change. We know that they want democracy, but we also know that they want to take the lead. Imagine as an American, another country coming in and telling us how we should run our country. We would be irate. In fact, we were. We had an entire revolution that separated us from England and made it so that we were the United States of America. This is the same sentiment felt by other countries. We can support, we can help build, we can facilitate relationships, and we will be stronger and safer as a result. But until we realize that not only are we the greatest country on earth, but we are also the beacon of light for the rest of the world. They will look to us to model, but we have to correct the problems that we've created over the last few decades, and most certainly since the last election cycle. We can heal the brokenness that we have, but we all have to be on board, and we have to demand that every government official understands that our safety comes first, and in order to create a safe country, we have to build strong alliances.
Thank you very much. Mr. Truono?
So I think the biggest threat in foreign policy is really nuclear proliferation. Sorry about that. And I think we see it in so many different ways. I said this back probably 20 years ago. I believe that there's an axis of evil around the world. It starts with Iran and goes through Russia to Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, and China. Now, Russia and China, I think, are going to come up later in the discussion, and we do have to work with those two countries because they are two world powers. But we have to continue to do, I think, what the policies of this administration are doing and working. When you look at North Korea and the threat that North Korea we faced, the policy of using strong sanctions and diplomacy has worked. As a matter of fact, the alliances that Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN, has made with the 7 countries that represent the world powers, got them all to agree to sanctions on North Korea. But we also used heavy leverage sanctions on China to make sure that they were cooperating, because they weren't. They were actually cheating initially, and that's why North Korea has now been forced to the table. The same with Russia. This administration has put heavy sanctions on Russia. You probably don't hear about that, but it's true. When the diplomat and his daughter, or the spies in the UK, were poisoned by Russian and verified that it was Russians, we put heavy sanctions on Russia, as well as in other cases. China, we've used that leverage as well. So I agree with Kerri on the fact that we should use diplomacy first and that we should use sanctions. It's something I know a lot about. When I worked at JP Morgan, I built their global correspondent banking compliance program. I implemented the USA Patriot Act, so I understand firsthand how sanctions work and how effective they can be. And I think as senators, we need to guide the administration on foreign policy and use the tools that we have. The alliances that we have, again, if you listen to sometimes the news media that will make hay over statements that our president says or tweets that he makes, I think have never been stronger. We've seen the president work on a trade deal with the European Union to bring parity. They're going to work on that over time. There was news out today that the Mexican and the US government are working on NAFTA, and they're very close to a solution. They've also started to work with Japan on creating fairer trade. I think these types of things around the world are helpful. And something that came out of the administration just a little bit ago was that they actually are working with in the Middle East with the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Egyptians to create an alliance in the Middle East like NATO so they can handle their own conflicts. I agree with Kerri as well. We should not go into any country, but we should assist countries that want democracy. And we're seeing that in Iran and in Venezuela. While we should not enter conflicts in countries like that, we should use our foreign policy and our diplomacy around the world to help the people of those countries have a free and democratic society if they so choose. Thank you.
Mr. Truono, as a follow-up, what are your views on global unrest and your thoughts on how to best address those concerns?
So I think, as I earlier indicated, I think there are conflicts all around the world. There was a report out just yesterday on Pakistan and the trouble that they're making in the Middle East. And so, again, I think the things that we're doing with our diplomacy, our State Department, and with our foreign policy, which has been, I think, quite the opposite of what a lot of people have said. We have seen the North Koreans stop their nuclear proliferation. Whether that leads ultimately to de-armament, we don't know, but I think it's a good first step. We've seen, I think, with the fact that we put heavy sanctions on Iran, that they are now weakening and possibly will come to the table. I think these types of tools that are used by this administration are helpful. Sometimes our president isn't so helpful, but that's his style, that's the way he chooses to do it. I think we have to measure the internal results. And I think some of the things that actually impact our national security, and I know these questions will probably come up later, is really the strength of our economy. Because a strong U.S. economy will help us lead the world and still be the leader that we once were, and hopefully will be again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, our president met with North Korea. Our president met with Russia. Our president was strong-armed by North Korea, and it was used as propaganda for the people. When we met with Russia, he had secret meetings that we still have yet to know what happened behind closed doors. Part of our security deals with having an open conversation. Part of our security deals with making sure there is a checks and balances system. We know that there have been questions about what has happened with Russia in our election cycle. The question is perpetuated by such actions. We're not safer because of those types of decisions. In fact, we're pushed behind. There is a place for tariffs and sanctions, and I absolutely agree that there are times and places to implement them. But they have to be done strategically. There has to be a clear plan, and it cannot be part of a Twitter battle between, I don't want to say dictators, but leaders of countries who are trying to determine who is stronger at any given time. We're not arm wrestling. We're determining the life and death of people in multiple countries. We need leadership that understands that to make sure we extinguish the unrest that we feel throughout this world. We need to make sure diplomacy is done with a balanced mind, a balanced strategy, and we have to make sure that it's not unilaterally decided. Remember, we had strikes on countries because the president was given free will to make those decisions. When in the Constitution that we are saying that we want to uphold, it says that that is the job of Congress. We have to protect our safety and our strength in the world by making sure we adhere to our Constitution and make sure our checks and balance system remains.
Thank you very much. Ms. Harris, we hear often during election time that Social Security is running out of money and unable to meet future obligations. Would you advocate that Social Security fulfill those obligations as originally agreed and intended? And what ideas do you have to make the program more financially sound and stable for future generations?
So the key is that when election cycles come around, we hear politicians saying that it's an unstable system. But if you look year after year, including when election cycles come around, our Social Security system is sound. The difference is they want to gamble with your future. They want to gamble with the money that you put into the Social Security system. We know that the money is there for each and every one of you. But the question is off. The question is off because it's not just enough to maintain the current system. We have to expand benefits. Our seniors are getting to the point where they cannot make ends meet more and more. And there is no excuse for that. They have all served our country in different ways, whether it was in the military, or as a teacher, or a lifetime retail worker, or as a doctor, or a lawyer. No matter how you served our country, you deserve to be cared for. We have the funds available. We can extend the benefits that are given out, and we can make sure that we take care of our senior people and they have constant care. When we are seeing pensions go away, when we are seeing that company after company is making record profits, but they decide to cut pension benefits, we have to, as a government, as a nation, say that when you come to retirement age, when you've put in your work, we will care for you. And if any politician, anybody running for office, ever says we are going to cut benefits to seniors, then they should never even be considered for office, because we need to take care of those who cared for us as we were coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Truono.
So Social Security is always the third rail of politics, right? And that's why I'm not a politician. For me, it's pretty simple. We have paid into the Social Security system, and we are entitled to those funds back. The fact that Congress has raided the Social Security system is probably the solution. So my recommendation, and I've said this for a long time, is really to put the Social Security funds back into the trust fund where they belong. Congress needs to stop raiding those funds for other programs or their pet projects. This is supposed to be a national retirement system that was created. We've all relied on it, and we all expect it. I'll tell you one thing, as a child, I've worked since I was 14 years old, and I remember back when I was cutting lawns when I was 14, working my way through high school, college, and law school, that, you know, this Social Security thing ain't gonna be around for me. And this was a long time ago. I just turned 60 yesterday, or in summer. Thank you. Actually, they sang happy birthday to me at the parade at the Beach Festival in Middletown, which I thought was very touching. But seriously, I think the fact that the problem we have with Congress and elected officials is that they have a spending problem. And I know there are probably going to be questions later on the national debt, so we'll probably talk more in detail about that. But for me, the solution is simple. And it's simple about being fiscally responsible. I'm as angry at Republicans as I am at Democrats for not being fiscally responsible. And thank you. Applaud. You should. And you know what? When it comes time to elect your public officials, you should hold them to a litmus test of what they believe in. And I believe in fiscal responsibility. I managed global budgets around the world. My last budget was with PayPal. I had a $30 million budget. And we never went over budget. We always stayed under budget. We followed and tracked it consistently. And I think the federal government needs to do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As just a brief follow-up, Mr. Truono, would you be in support or favor of raising or changing the Social Security cap, which which is currently at 127,200. It's an income cap.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the whole system needs to be looked at, and I think up to and including, I've never been big on caps in the government, right? So when we have a cutoff for programs or benefits to people who are in need, and we always need to have some level of a safety net for the poorest in our society, we always forget about the fact that there's a disintermediation. So if you make $60,000, you get the benefit. If you make $60,001, you don't. That doesn't make any sense to me because it doesn't encourage people to get off the welfare system or off food stamps or other programs that we do and should have and continue, but we need to make a transitional period for people so that they can transition into better paying jobs and be more productive members of society.
Thank you. Ms. Harris?
I do agree that we need to get rid of the caps. It is not serving any of us. Again, our seniors have served our country in different ways. I truly believe that service is not just with veterans. There are teachers, there are mechanics. None of us can function without each other. We are a community, and we have to make sure we thrive as a community. That includes our seniors. You don't come to the golden years of your life and have the expectation that you will be let down by your community. It is our duty to make sure that every senior in this United States, and most specifically in Delaware, are treated with the respect that they deserve, and that they have their Social Security benefits expanded, and that we protect Social Security benefits and no longer tell them that we're willing to risk gambling with their final years.
Thank you very much. Mr. Truono, with so many states competing for relocation of large corporations by offering tax breaks and incentives, explain your real-world ideas for bringing employers to Delaware and growing the state economy.
So I'm not a big favor of tax incentives to bring companies to Delaware or any other state. We look at Bloom Energy, and if you've read anything about it, it's been quite a debacle. We, as the taxpayers of the state of Delaware, or ratepayers, are paying an enormous amount of money to fund this company, which guaranteed 900 jobs, by the way, and only brought 300. But in terms of my view, and this is something that I've talked about because it's something that I have some experience in, I believe the future of our economy is technology. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, cryptocurrencies. When I talk about this stuff, I think people's eyes glaze over, but it's something that I actually spent a long time in. I'll tell you one quick funny story. I was asked to speak at the Rotary Club in Kent County, and the woman there said, who was in charge of it, said, "I don't want you to talk about politics. Can you talk about something else, like maybe something you did?" I said, "How about Bitcoin?" She goes, "Oh, that would be great." And I'm thinking, the night before I'm laying in bed saying, "Oh my God, the demographics of a Rotary Club are not ever going to understand what I'm talking about." I was absolutely floored by the phenomenal level of questions and knowledge by these groups of seniors. And one quick question, one woman said, "Would you invest in Bitcoin?" And I said, well, when I first started looking at it in 2011, it was trading under $100. I said, I didn't think this thing was going to go anywhere, so don't take investment advice from me. But seriously, I think the real answer is, I think blockchain and technology is something this country needs to get behind, because we need to be a leader in technology. We can bring those jobs to Delaware because we have the infrastructure from the banking industry, and I think it'll be helpful to bring up not only jobs to Delaware in the short run, but in the long term, because the future is with technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As a state, we've failed our future. Our students are going to some of the top colleges in the nation. UD, Del State, Wilmington University, Wesley College. We educate our students well, and then we give them no options. We pride ourselves on being a family state. Generation after generation stays here, but it's getting to the point where our children cannot. The only way we can fix that is by bringing in the industries that allow them to stay. In Sussex County, we do not have high-speed internet. When you go down there, you have a lot of hope that has been lost because there is no industry. People come from around the world and across the nation to visit our beaches. If we put in the proper infrastructure, we could have a new Silicon Valley right here. People would be excited about it. If we talk about bringing technology, how can we do it if we are not technologically advanced? In Newcastle County, we depend alone on banking industries. And we keep saying if we give them incentives, they'll stay. And the more incentives we get, we see that when things go wrong for them, they don't take care of Delawareans. They lay us off. The same happened with AstraZeneca. We gave them all of these deals. And when it came to the end of the contract, they left us. We're not seeing that the incentives are helping Delawareans. We are seeing that the incentives are helping the corporations. And we do not believe that corporations are people here in the state of Delaware. When you look around, you look to your left or your right, it doesn't matter if somebody is a Republican or a Democrat or independent or a libertarian. We see Delawareans. We see somebody that knows somebody we know. And we want to know that we're taken care of. I live in Kent County. Our options are factory jobs or working at Dover Downs. This is unacceptable. And until we get enraged, until we say you need to send infrastructure spending money here so we can make it so that we are in a place that people want to start businesses, we will never advance as a state.
Thank you very much. Ms. Harris, how can Congress address our national debt while keeping vital programs properly funded with respect to Department of Education, defense, labor, healthcare? What are your ideas on reducing expenses without adversely impacting those key areas?
We all agree that our government spends too much money. The question is, what are we prioritizing? We are not prioritizing people, and we all know that. All of these departments, all of these structures are important, but we're not putting safeties in place.
Yeah, I think you're fine. I don't know.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, we're not putting safeties in place. I know because I've worked for the government. We don't ask people to find the best deal, the best contracts. We just say, you have to go through this company. And then we don't hold that company accountable when they are charging us too much, when they don't meet their deadlines. And so we're spending millions upon millions of dollars. We currently have heads of departments flying private jets and staying in houses that they did not pay for, that jeopardize our safety and our trust in our government. We have to change how we run government. But most importantly, we have to prioritize people. If we're running departments and with wasteful spending, we're not going to have the money necessary to take care of our communities. And we deserve to be cared for. Not because we want handouts, but because we want a stronger community. When one of us do well, we all do well. But when there is any type of struggle, we all feel the effects. Whether it's education system that fails, whether it's crime in our communities, whether it is a healthcare system that is not working for us, we're all affected. And when our government prioritizes you and I, we will see a change and we will see that our budgets work for us. And there has never been a time in our entire history where doing the morally responsible thing has not also turned into being the fiscally responsible thing. And we have to look at that history and not be told over and over again that it's the reverse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Truono.
I believe that the problem is not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. There's been a lot of criticism about the tax cuts from people on the left that said it was a handout to the rich and it didn't help the poor. Well, I frankly think the statistics prove that wrong. We have a GDP at 4.1% growth rate. Not less than 2 years ago, we were told that 2% was the new normal. We're seeing tax policy that's effective, it's working, it's lowering unemployment, and it's creating jobs for people. I think in the long run, we just need to continue to drive policies that will help stimulate the economy. The national debt is a serious problem, and it will become a more serious problem as interest rates rise, which they will, because as part of an increasing economy, we're going to see inflation. So we need to attack this problem now. And the problem is a spending problem. It's the size of the federal government that continues to get larger and larger instead of smaller and smaller. We need to reduce the size of the federal government without reducing social welfare and health programs, but making them applicably applied, like requiring welfare to work, and other mechanisms you can use to help people get jobs in the society. I think healthcare is a great example. There are people on the left that want Medicare for all. They think that's the solution. I said this when they were talking about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Why would we disrupt 60 to 65% of our health care coverage for employers who provide them to their employees? As a matter of fact, Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire Hathaway are working together to create a consortium to lower prices for both the companies and for their employees. There's a person running for Senate who believes we should have price transparency in healthcare. There are a lot of solutions that are out there, and it angers me that the solutions are known on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans. They can't come together to solve this problem. So the problem with the national debt is really streamlining our government, making it more efficient, using technology, and not doing things that will create an expansive government. One of the things that I think is really important is the merging of the Department of Education and the Labor Department, because the future of this country is jobs, and I think by merging those two, we can reduce the size of government and reduce regulations. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Mr. Truono, so federal dollars for programs like education, beach replenishment, financial incentives are important to Delaware. Given the size of the federal deficit and the controversy over earmarks, do you believe those federal dollars should continue to come to the state, and how will you balance your duty to help Delaware with your duty to keep the federal government on a sustainable fiscal path?
So this is part of the problem, right? I think we all want to have the federal funds to do beach replenishment, which is important, obviously, for protection of our citizens. We also want federal dollars for a whole host of programs. But I believe, being a states' rights person, that we should allow these programs to be administered on the local and state level. Because if you do that, you can take the money from the federal government and administer them at a local level in a much more effective and efficient way so that you can help the citizens of your state, in our case, in the state of Delaware. The other thing that I think is important to recognize is that this administration has talked about new ideas, like doing public-private partnerships for road and infrastructure building. This kind of thing, I think, will help, because we don't invest all the federal dollars or all the local dollars. We allow private enterprise to invest their own dollars for a return. They did this on a major highway from the District of Columbia to Virginia, and it worked out very effectively. It was done on time, it was done efficiently, and it was done correctly. And now the private enterprise took the risk, while the federal government funded some of the seed money and the state provided funds for that as well. It was a successful project, and the type of things we should look at as new solutions, instead of using federal dollars or state dollars and tax dollars, which is what they are, and allow for the free market system to work effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, at Dover Air Force Base, we had a private industry running our water. And over the last couple of years, I've lost a number of people I served with due to cancer. All under the age of 50, all really healthy people generally, and we couldn't figure out why we were dying. Our friends and family were dying. And then an article came out in about March, and it said that there was contaminated water that was that the people that were living on Dover Air Force Base were drinking. But we were told by the DOD in that same article that there's not much they can do but suggest that the problem be fixed. Why? Because they're under contract. They were privatized. Privatization does not help you and I do better. Privatization helps wealthy people get wealthier. We've seen it with the prison system. We've seen it with the healthcare system. We've seen it with all types of industries. We cannot allow ourselves to be lied to. And it's the same thing with tax cuts. You can't spend tax money if you don't have tax money. And the only people that don't have the burden of paying taxes are the ultra wealthy. We know that our deficit is going to expand by over $1 trillion due to the tax cut. We also know that these same companies that we were told will be a trickle-down effect are making record profits. And all the money they were supposed to inject into our system, they're only using it to buy up stocks and make their bottom line expand. And we're told, wait a little longer, you'll feel the effects. But the problem is we can't wait a little longer because we're feeling the effects. We can't pay our bills. Our kids can't pay their bills. We're worried about health care. We're worried about what tomorrow looks like. We need a government that works for us, that makes sure that every dollar is used to advance the middle class, because I guarantee you, when we do better, corporations will do better, but we have never seen the reverse.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ms. Harris, what are your feelings about the Veterans Administration and its role in the future of not only veterans' health care, but their disability benefits as well?
First, let me tell you that I would never go quietly with the idea of privatizing the VA. I will not allow my brothers and sisters in arms to die because of privatization and deciding whether your life is worth $1. I will also say that we need to expand benefits for our VA recipients. We know that dental is not available, but we have dental problems that affect our health, and we need to ensure that regardless of what your VA rating is, that you receive dental care. We need to make sure that there are more facilities available, because it is not okay that people in southern Delaware have to drive between an hour and 2 hours respectively to get the health care that they need here in Wilmington. We need to make sure that there is access everywhere. I do agree with expanding it and making it sure that small doctors' offices have the ability to treat us. But that is not privatization. That's an extension of our current system. But we have to go even further, because the caregivers of our veterans suffer as well. The spouses that follow us around for every 2 to 4 years also need help. When they're caring for our wounded, whether it is an actual physical ailment or PTSD, it affects an entire family, and they need to be cared for as well. And that's why I do believe in a Medicare for All system. Because I know that we all deserve health care, because we are human beings. We all deserve health care because we are Delawareans and we work hard. And we deserve health care because the cost is too high not to have it. And you can never put a price tag on your life, your spouse's life, your child's life, your parents' life. But the government does that every single year. They tell us we cannot afford it. They tell us that you are not worth more than a certain amount of money. And if a person is running for office or is currently in office, says that they do not have the ability to fight for you, to make sure that's a reality, then they do not deserve to be in office.
Thank you. Actually, Ms. Harris, and as a brief follow-up, what are your thoughts on the Department of Defense taking over operations of the Veterans Hospital from the VA?
Actually, I think it should be the reverse. Currently, I have TRICARE, and I'm still able to be seen at Dover Air Force Base. We're severely lacking in the number of doctors there. We also know that our budget is impacted as military, and we should separate the VA budget from the DoD budget and make sure that DoD deals with simply defense and the VA deals with health care for our veterans and all active duty reserves and National Guard members. I think it will be much more efficient. We will find that money will not slip below the rug and we can't figure out where it went, and we will serve our country better, both as a healthcare facility and Department of Defense.
Thank you very much. Mr. Truono, your feelings on the Veteran Administration and its role in the future of veterans health care?
Yeah, I'll take the questions in reverse, but I'll
Okay,
answer
that's
them
fine.
both.
I mean, yeah, sure.
This is probably one area where Kerri and I agree on veterans health care, and vehemently agree. I'm not a veteran. I did hire a disabled veteran as my campaign manager, and one of the first things we did was travel up and down the state meeting with veterans. And I think it is incumbent upon the federal government to take care of those people who made a commitment to all of us to keep us free. And so, thank you. Yes. So what the VA, the head of the VA and the American Legion told me are exactly that. They do not believe that we should privatize veterans' health care, and I agree with that. And we should not merge the DoD with the Veterans Administration. The Choice Program, which has been recently enacted to help veterans choose private care providers and be benefited from, I think is important. My Republican opponent believes that we should merge the DoD and the VA. And I think he's not listening to veterans, as I have been, because I think they would absolutely never support that. And I think the reason why is the VA system allows for special care to individuals who have special needs who are veterans, but also the ability to give veterans choice. While there are still some kinks in that system, I think are helpful. But one last thing, if we do away with the VA system, there's a very big concern that we'll do away with the benefits. And a lot of low-income veterans use those benefits for housing and for their normal expenses. And so I don't think we want to see that happen. So I agree with Kerri on this issue. On healthcare, I disagree. I believe that we should have healthcare for everyone. I just don't believe the federal government should run our healthcare system because I don't think they can do it as efficiently and effectively as we can. There were 2 reports that came out on Medicare for All, and it said it will cost us $32 trillion over 10 years. And the way that they'll get to the level is to reduce payments to 40%. So you're going to have a shortage of doctors, you're going to have a shortage of healthcare. It doesn't solve the problem. Again, if you have 60% of the people covered, or 65%, we should help the people in the middle who don't have insurance, small business owners, and individuals in the individual market get better and less expensive insurance. Thank you.
Do you feel you've addressed both of those questions? Do you need additional time? Or you're okay, great, thank you. So here's a large one, and you will be given 6 minutes to answer these questions. So we'll start with Mr. Truono. Say you're elected, and you've been tasked with writing a comprehensive immigration bill. What would you do, and how would you address the following issues? And I'll just list them now, but if you need a refresher, please just ask. Chain immigration, the lottery system, DACA, catch and release, ICE, and open borders versus the wall.
Wow, this is a dynamite question.
Okay, so everyone settle in.
So I have been consistent, and if you want to watch my videos, I've not changed my position. I do support the administration's approach to this. There is proposed legislation, it's called the RISE Act, so if you don't know it, look it up. It is a comprehensive legal immigration reform system that solves some of the problems for illegal immigration. And one of the things I've said early on, there's been a lot of controversy because our president seems to draw controversy around what he says and what he does about the wall. But I ask people this question: are you concerned about the opioid crisis? Yes. Are you concerned about human trafficking and child prostitution? Yes. So what does a wall or border security do? It stops the flow of illegal drugs. We can do everything in this country to change the protocols for prescribing opioids, and that's not going to solve the problem because illegal fentanyl is coming across our borders, and that's what people are dying from. So the wall and border security are not some type of hateful idea to keep illegal immigrants out. We have ports of entry for people who are seeking asylum in this country. They need to follow the process. The legal immigration system in this country is also broken, which is why I think the RISE Act will solve a lot of these problems. And it does address chain migration, which I do not support. It does address the visa lottery system, and as opposed to having a visa to decide who can come into this country, we should have a program that's based on merit. Because if you understand the legal immigration system, there are a lot of hoops you need to go through in order to become a citizen. It takes nearly 10 years. You have to have sponsorship, you have to have a job or a potential job, you have to either be going into the military or having education. Why would we create some artificial way of letting people come to this country that don't follow the process? Now, DACA is an interesting issue. I think the administration and the president particularly offered an olive branch to the other side to solve this problem. And the other side did not take him up on it. I believe that people who have come here illegally, and in the case of DACA recipients, through no fault of their own as they claim, need to have a registration system, need to continue to get their work permits, and give them a path to citizenship. I firmly believe in regulatory compliance, which is what I'm familiar with, and in things like this we need a carrot and a stick. And the carrot would be if you follow the rules, you make restitution for any taxes you didn't pay. And a lot of people who are here illegally, and clearly even some of the DACA recipients are paying taxes like they're supposed to, will gladly accept the fact that they have a right to citizenship. Now, I know there are people on the far right that don't agree with me, but I think they're wrong. I think if we give a proper course for people who are here, just like we do in our criminal justice system, you can make restitution and you can then become a productive member of society. I think we should allow that for the DACA recipients and solve the problem. The RISE Act does one other thing which is very important. It adjusts the level of legal immigration to the level of our workforce that's needed. It doesn't put immigrants before citizens, but it allows for us to be able to monitor the level. Instead of having a flat bar cutoff, we're only going to let 1 million immigrants in this year, we may want more in. As unemployment continues to drop, we may need more people to do jobs around the country, but we shouldn't do that at the expense of our legal citizens who want jobs in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Harris.
So, merit is something that sounds good on the surface. But who determines who has the right to come here? My great-grandfather was an immigrant from Sweden. He was a dairy farmer. He moved to Pennsylvania, and he worked like nobody's business to create a family, to make it so that they were independent. Then he had my grandfather, who was an amazing man and went on to start a business like most immigrant families do. And he realized that there was opportunity in California because education was more affordable there. So he uprooted his family to include my mother, who was the oldest of 6, and moved to California. And all of his children became educated. And they went on to do amazing things in this country. My mother was an advocate. She registered black sharecroppers in the Deep South during the Civil Rights Movement. She went on to be a school teacher. And she over and over again made sure that we made our communities better, and she still does it now. And now she has a biracial daughter running a competitive race for the United States Senate. And if somebody would have told my great-grandfather he did not have the right to move here, then we wouldn't have this opportunity to change what representation is like. There are different skills and we need all of them. And merit is just not for the top of every country coming in. We know our GDP increases for the first 2 generations of immigrant families. And if we were to suddenly say, you cannot come here, our nation would fail. One of the beauties of being an American is that we are strong and powerful because we have ideas that are diverse. Our diversity is what makes us as amazing as we are. There were people that said, turn away Jewish people from coming to this country. And if we would have listened, we wouldn't have had Einstein. We wouldn't have had the ability to win the war that we were fighting during World War II. If we said that immigrants couldn't come, we wouldn't have had people creating companies like Apple. And when the company started, it was in a garage from a child whose family had to work to make it in this country. We have a president who wants special privileges because his wife just had the honor of helping her family, her parents, become American citizens by using chain migration. Why is it okay for them and not others? Our DACA students are amazing, and I've worked with them. They are the very best our nation has to offer in many ways. They are professionals, doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers. If we got rid of our DACA students, we would lose 1,200 teachers when we already don't have enough people serving our K-12 population. Is that what you want? For your children to fall further behind? When we're just competing with developing countries as it is? They do not have criminal records. They have to be upstanding citizens. Why wouldn't we want them to be our fellow citizens. I have served alongside in combat with military members who are DACA recipients. And in all but name alone, they believe themselves to be Americans and were willing to put their lives on the line for you. Why wouldn't you open your homes, your communities to them? We talk about a wall. And then we're negotiating for 700 miles. If you really want to get somewhere, you're going to find a way to get over or under. We already have hundreds of tunnels that are dug under our border between Mexico and the United States. We are seeing now that people are flying from South America, buying a $300 ticket, going to Canada, and coming in over the Canadian border. So tell me, does it make sense to spend money that we can use to educate our children, to improve our infrastructure, to make it so that we can build jobs that are sustainable for a symbolic wall? The amount of drugs that have come from our southern border have decreased. We're talking about MS-13, but the truth is MS-13 started in America. We sent them back, and then they came back. This is an American problem, not a southern border problem. And I can tell you as a veteran, the way we can keep the safety of our border patrol the highest is by having digital surveillance. They know what they are coming across. They can plan their attack, and they will save their lives and the lives of people trying to come across the border. But I guarantee you, the way to keep us safer is not separating families and stepping on treaties that say refugees are welcome here, and making it seem like we are a racist and xenophobic nation, because we are not. We have always been a welcoming nation, and we need to maintain that and make sure we are safer and a happier place because we welcome our immigrant populations.
Thank you. And Ms. Harris, we'd like to ask just specifically, what is your stance on how undocumented immigrants in America should be handled?
Yes. Okay. That's really easy for me. 85% of the people who are coming to America are documented. But our system is flawed, and it comes to a point where they end up becoming undocumented. We need to make sure we reform our immigration system. What we tend to do is wait decade after decade after decade, and then we say, whoa, it's a little bit too much. Let's offer amnesty. I say, instead of doing that, streamline the process. Make sure that we keep people here that need to stay here. If they need to renew their paperwork, don't make it so costly that they can't do so. If people want to come here just as temporary residents to work and go back to their country, then charge them a fee, have a documented worker program like we used to. Not everybody wants to make America home, but I can guarantee you we could use those tax revenues. Because if we keep giving tax cuts to the rich, we need people to come over the border and serve us and give us our tax revenue so we can pay for the services that we need as a working class population. And we know we will destroy our country if we do not reform our immigration process. We will have less undocumented people in our country if we make it a point to say, let's sit down, come to the drawing board, and actually, after all of these decades, create comprehensive immigration reform.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Truono.
So I'm glad to hear you say that, Kerri, because that's exactly what the RISE Act does. So I encourage you to look it up, because it would solve these problems. It would fix the E-Verify system. It would allow for the people who want to come to this country legally. What bothers me about this argument, and I think it bothers a lot of people on both sides, we get very emotional about a lot of the comments that are made in the media by our president and others. We have a problem. There's a big difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And what you just stated is exactly the solution, because it fixes our legal immigration system. That makes it easier for people to come to this country, as it should be. We are a nation of immigrants, and we should be proud of that. My parents' grandparents immigrated to this country, and I think I'm proud of that as well, but they came here legally. And so I think if we want to have a rational discussion about this issue, which I think is passionate on both sides, we need to come together and develop policies that will help solve the problem, as opposed to calling people names and saying you're a hater or you're not. And how do we really fix the problem? Because the illegal immigration process in this country is broken because the legal immigration process is broken. So again, I encourage all of you to look up the RISE Act, and maybe that's the foundation where we start to fix the problem, but we bring arguments from both sides of the aisle to come together to solve the problem once and for all. Thank you.
Mr. Truono, can you explain why you would or would not support the repeal of the National Firearms Act?
I've actually talked to a number of people on this subject. Most people in the room probably don't know what the National Firearms Act is, but it's certain restrictions for the ownership of firearms. 36, I believe, or 39 states have adopted it. Delaware has not. One of the things in the act that would probably benefit us in Delaware, there's an amnesty for people who have World War II or earlier types of firearms that have been banned that are just using as a collector item. That's actually in that act. I have been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe in the Constitution. Now, we can argue on both sides of this, but the Second Amendment allows people, and under the Heller decision and the McDonald's decision that follows, does not allow the government to confiscate guns, period, end of story. The issue that we've seen, and the one that makes everyone so emotional about this, if we could just ban those AR-15s, that would solve the problem. You could ban every weapon in this country, and other countries have. It does not solve the problem. The problem with the shootings that we've seen recently have been about 4 things, as I see it. 1, a mental health issue that we've not addressed in this country. 2, it's about actually fixing the NICS system and the loopholes that have created there, and we should do that. And 3, we need to fix the 911 system. When the gentleman in Florida called in, there should have been somebody, a social worker or a police officer at his home to counsel him about his trouble and maybe allowed him to seek help. And the last thing, and I've said this at the very beginning of this debate, we could do a risk assessment for the individuals in every school, every church, every public facility like this one, a risk assessment on how we make it safe for people who attend functions like this or otherwise. Let individuals decide that. Let the schools decide that. I spoke at a school that had it's a private school that had 88 kids, and they had key cards to get in, locked entry. They decided that that was the best way to solve the problem for them. I don't think the federal government should dictate or mandate it, but I do think that the schools should, and churches as well, determine how they best keep the people in their communities safe. There is government money that's been, the House has passed the bill, the Senate hasn't passed it yet, to send money to the states to help secure our schools and our facilities. And I think that's the right solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't want to take your guns. But I do want to make sure that we're safe. And I think it's very important. And let me give you a story. Again, I'm a veteran, and I know how the velocity of a high-powered rifle can shoot through body after body after body. The same bullet. And I know that after every single school shooting, I speak to my now 7-year-old daughter about tactics I learned as a military member. And I have to tell her, if somebody gets shot, one of your friends gets shot, I know you'll be sad and you want to cry, but you need to hold it together. You need to pull their body over yours. And we go through this drill on a regular basis. And there's a saying that we have in the military, and you've all heard it, that there are no atheists in a foxhole. But there is no parent who has had their child's life taken or nearly taken that does not want some type of comprehensive gun control. I refuse to say to my daughter, should her friends die, that I did not fight to save them. If a first responder has 5 minutes to get from their station to my daughter's school, I want to know that it's going to take the person shooting that school longer to shoot somebody else because they have to drop a clip and put in a new one and not have a giant clip to shoot. I want to know that the velocity of that bullet is such that when it hits a body, it stops. I want to know it cannot travel through a wall and kill a child that is hiding with their teacher in a restroom. You should be able to hunt. I'm from Kent County. Kent and Sussex, people build family relationships and ties by going hunting. And I think that building those ties are important.
Thank you.
But right now, it's more important to me to save the lives of our children.
Thank you. Ms. Harris, what is your stance on the Hearing Protection Act?
We have this thing in our country where we like to dress up legislation with a pretty title. This is one of those things. The Hearing Protection Act was lobbied by the NRA. The NRA used to be an association that really was about gun control. They used to teach you how to properly house your weapons. They used to have classes for people to make sure that they were shooting safely. They used to actually serve our community, and then they changed. Now, they lobby for legislation like this that even police officers are against. They say if you put a silencer on your gun, they're doing it to protect the hearing of the person at the shooting range. Police officers will tell you that it's going to make you less safe because they don't know where the shots are coming from. Do you remember when I said I wanted to save your child's life and that of my own? Imagine in the school we can't determine where the shooter is. How many more lives will be lost? When you go to the movie theater, how many more lives will be lost? When you go to a concert in Las Vegas, how many lives will be lost? Because we've been lied to in legislation. Because the NRA lost their way. We should go back, we should encourage the NRA to go back to being a safety association and also to stay out of our legislation and don't lie to us about why you want to pass these laws. Protect the lives of the citizens is what our legislators should do, and also the NRA.
Thank you very much. Mr. Truono, the Hearing Protection Act?
Yes, so I've talked to a number of police officers as well, and actually there was a group of them that, sponsored by the NRA, came to see the effects of a silencer. A silencer simply muffles the sound. It doesn't eliminate the sound. So it protects the shooter's hearing. And I think that's something we certainly would want to consider. The fact that the NRA, and Kerri, you mentioned a lot of things, the NRA still does those things. You know, we need to stop in this country vilifying one organization over another. Because we could talk about a whole host of organizations that do things that we may not like. But the NRA are not evil people. I've met a lot of NRA members. I've met a lot of Second Amendment people who believe that they have the protection under our Constitution. You may not like that, but that's the law of our land. It's the Constitution. So you cannot ban guns. You can't confiscate guns. We should have legislation that protects people. The gun doesn't kill somebody. The magazine doesn't kill somebody. It's the individual that kills somebody. So if we really want to stop the rhetoric and solve the problem, we really need to address the mental health issue in this country, because that would be the solution. And we should sit down and have a rational discussion about how we solve problems, not just this one, but all of them. Our government has become so divisive on both sides, and I'm not picking one side or the other. I think the reason why I'm running is because I want to go to Washington to help solve problems. I want to work with people like Kerri Harris, who we can come together and agree on the things we can agree on, support our Constitution, and protect and help people in society. Thank you.
Mr. Truono, what are your thoughts and positions on a national conceal and carry weapons permit?
I would support it, and I've said I would support it openly. And the reason why I would support it, and again, we used a lot of examples for things. There was a woman who lived in Pennsylvania who crossed the line in New Jersey, got arrested and put in jail because New Jersey didn't have reciprocity. That kind of thing shouldn't happen in this country. She had the right to carry a firearm. She had it for protection. She had it because, and she was trained to use it, because she had a restraining order against an ex-boyfriend. There are a lot of women in this country that do have firearms for protection. And I think that's important. If that's what they choose and how they choose to protect themselves. Our Constitution protects that, and I think this law would be one that I would support. Thank you.
Ms. Harrison, National Conceal Carry?
One of the major areas that I wanted to fix was making sure that our background checks were consistent across the entire United States. If we propose a national concealed carry weapons carry permit, we have to ensure that those background checks do not have loopholes. I do not want somebody crossing state lines to injure somebody else. And we have to be very conscious of that. Again, I'm not trying to take your guns, but I want to make sure you're safer. But I want to go back because I also want to say that, again, please, I don't want to be lied to, and I don't want you to be lied to. If we want to protect your hearing, please and you're shooting your weapon, I encourage you to buy earplugs. But to go further, I want to make it very clear that we need to come to the table on many things, but our guns are one of them. We can say that it's not a bullet, that it's not a gun, that it's not a high-powered rifle, that it is the person, and that is true, but also remember, we have an opioid crisis we are fighting. It is not the drug, it is the person who is suffering. And so we have to realize that if you had somebody that was suffering from addiction, would you put drugs and alcohol in front of them? No, you would stage an intervention, and we need to stage an intervention right now with gun safety. That does not mean that it's going to ban everything forever, but right now, until we fix our problems, we need to. And we have to make it clear that because you have a mental health problem, it doesn't make you innately predisposed to violence. But we have to heal our communities. And we have to do it by expanding our mental health services and not stigmatizing mental health.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Ms. Harris, do you have any specific thoughts or ideas on how to improve school safety and repealing gun-free school zones?
That also goes back into mental health. One of my jobs that I have is I work with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. And I work in schools that are under-resourced and with children who are exposed to traumas that they should not be exposed to at their age. They're growing up too fast. And school after school will tell you that they do not have enough mental health services. And we need to fix that. And this goes beyond inner city schools in Wilmington, because the truth is we're not seeing school shootings in inner city schools like we did in the 80s and 90s. We're seeing it in middle-class white neighborhoods. There are different issues. But on the streets of Wilmington, we're seeing children dying. In middle-class white neighborhoods, we're seeing children dying. We need to save our children. We need to reconnect with them. We will cut down on the violence in our schools and in our streets once we realize that the resources are not available to our children. We need to make sure that they are put first. Our future is determined by them. Mental health services, after-school programs, access to things like physical health care. They are not seeing their parents. We're being told about this economy that is growing, that we have the lowest unemployment rate in forever, apparently, but it doesn't really count, because there's this little book called How to Lie with Statistics. Everybody should read it, and we're being lied to with statistics. People are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're not seeing their children. And so while children are raising themselves, they're feeling lost and forgotten and neglected. And until we fix that, we are going to continue to see this violence. We start fixing our violence in our schools and in our streets by fixing our children. And until we do, we will continue to see this type of epidemic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Truono.
I'll get to the gun-free school zone in a minute, but I do want to address something that Kerri mentioned, and I absolutely agree with her. The problem is an addiction problem. The problem is a mental health problem. Those are the things we need to address. We have failed the people of this country, the people of the state of Delaware, by not delivering proper mental health and addiction programs. Putting someone in an opioid-addicted clinic for 30 days does not solve the problem. Most experts believe it takes a year to 18 months in order for someone to fully recover. So we should fund programs that do that. And as I said earlier, I believe we should fund programs from the federal government, but have them executed on the state level. There is a place called the Home of Hope in Seaford. It's not open. It can house 34 women with infants and children. And it's not open because it doesn't have the money to open. It's completely ready to go. And so we're working on a project to help raise money to get that facility open. Because that type of facility, which would be one of the only one in the country, here in Delaware, would help women who are suffering with an addiction problem, that have infants and have no place to go. So it's those types of social programs done at the local level that can help solve this problem. I think we've learned, when we try to solve problems sometimes, like gun-free school zones, who gets in? The bad guy with the gun. There are already laws that protect and prohibit people from carrying firearms and getting them. And I agree with Kerri, we need to fix the next system. I said that earlier. So there are ways we can solve this problem and address the issue. And for people who are trained and registered to carry and open carry, and want to, who are members of the faculty or the staff, and want to have a gun in that facility to protect everyone there. You're right, 911 doesn't come fast enough. I would rather have someone in there who I know is trained and skilled who can stop a shooter that quickly. I think it's important, and I would look to repeal the gun-free school zone. I think we all should agree and talk about that issue. Again, it goes back to school safety. Let the schools decide what's the best way for them to secure their facility and to protect the children in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very specific question. Delaware is among the top 10 states for incidences of gonorrhea, chlamydia, and unintended pregnancies. The recently announced domestic gag rule has raised questions over how those on Medicaid and low-income individuals will access sexual health services. So Mr. Truono, how would you continue to reduce these rates and help make Delawareans healthier?
So Medicaid is a program that helps low-income people that do not qualify for Medicare. It's a state-run program. And I think that Medicaid helps fill the gap for those people who are low-income that do not have private insurance or other types of health care. I think it's incumbent upon us as we continue, as our society continues to grow, is to help people and have a safety net for people who cannot afford proper health care. I think this type of program should, again, be administered at the state level, at a local level, through faith-based organizations, through nonprofits and community groups, can administer those services and get support from the federal government using our Medicaid system to help solve this problem, like all the other problems we have. I think that big government programs, as I've said, is not the solution. We can solve problems like this at the local level, and we can use government assistance as appropriate for people who cannot otherwise afford these types of social services.
Thank you, sir.
So, one of the problems with the funding of private organizations is that the government decides what you get to do. One of the biggest service providers in our state for reproductive health is Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood has gotten a bad rap because they provide abortion services. But you have to understand that that is like 3% of what they do. And they get no government funding for it. But government funding has been cut. And that means lives have been cut. That means that people who go in for sexually transmitted diseases, for people who go in for cancer screenings, for people who go in to say that I know right now I can't afford to have a child and get birth control, are limited. We need to understand that all of these things are connected. You will see cuts in things like Medicaid by the people when they're able to stand on their own feet, but you can't stand on your own feet as long as the government keeps getting involved and saying, I control what you do with your body. We cannot allow that. And we're seeing it across the board. I wanted to mention something really quickly. With the opioid crisis, I agree with that we need to bring in more money, and I work as part of my job with the Opioid Network, and I've helped Elizabeth Warren and Elijah Cummings develop an act called the CARE Act, which will bring $100 billion to the United States to be divvied up amongst our states to help provide more services. Currently, on any